James Harden is refusing to play for the Philadelphia 76ers and has demanded a trade from the team, which is a very weird offseason decision. And if he continues down this path, he could actually get banned from the NBA. Now, players have been banned from the league in the past for a variety of different reasons, but this is totally different. Because of an obscure clause in the CBA in an unprecedented situation in Philadelphia, James Harden could have already played his last game in his NBA career. And normally I wouldn't even consider this to be a possibility, but we have to think about who we are talking about here. James Harden has a history of not only quitting on teams, but sabotaging their seasons. Going back to when he was trying to force his way out of Houston and very clearly did not want to be there. He was in a stalemate with the team, similar to what's happening in Philadelphia right now, and eventually he got his way. Then you go to Brooklyn, that situation gets weird. He's extremely frustrated that Kyrie Irving just refuses to play. He sabotages their season and ends up forcing his way to Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is very familiar with players doing exactly what Harden is right now. It wasn't that long ago that they were experiencing the exact same thing with Ben Simmons trying to force his way out of Philadelphia with multiple years left on his contract and refusing to show up and play for the team and getting fined as a result. However, this situation has a really important detail. If you go and look in the CBA, there is a clause in there that says if a player is in the last year of their contract and they refuse to play for the team, 30 days into the season, that team can essentially ban the player from being in the NBA at all. To be more clear, 30 days into the season in which a player is on an expiring contract, if they refuse to show up, that team can void their contract completely, and they are not allowed to sign with a new team until, in this case, the Sixers decide that James Harden can go sign with a new team, essentially banning him from signing NBA contracts. And at this point, it's clear that the relationship between Harden and the team is so fractured that the idea of him returning to Philadelphia in full capacity and playing for them this season is very, very unlikely, which makes it even stranger that he decided to make this decision in the first place. If James Harden wanted to play somewhere else, he had the opportunity to. He was a free agent this offseason, yet he decided not to exercise his right to be a free agent, to opt into Philadelphia to get his $35 million expiring contract and then request a trade. Now, there's an important detail to consider here, and that is who James Harden is dealing with. The GM of the Philadelphia 76ers is Daryl Morey, who is notorious for being one of the most hard-headed negotiators in the entire league. He's not going to give in to demands for a trade unless he feels like he's getting a trade that helps his team win. Unless he feels like he's getting a star in exchange for James Harden or pieces that he can then trade into a star later, he's not going to budge on this trade request. And if Harden decides to just not show up, they could literally ban him from the league. Now, it's important to understand that this clause doesn't say anything about what kind of shape James Harden needs to be in, how well he needs to play, and what capacity he needs to return to the team. He just needs to be there. He needs to be an active participant with the team. When you go and look back at his history in both Houston as well as Brooklyn, when he didn't want to be there anymore, he still did show up. He did practice. He did play in the games. He didn't play very well, but he was there. That is his leverage, is he can still show up, not get banned from the league, and have such a negative effect on Philadelphia's season that they might still be forced to trade him anyway. And for the Sixers, it doesn't even make sense to go through with this in the first place. Yeah, it gets rid of the distraction. It gets James Harden away from the team, and then you have this leverage over him where maybe you can force him to come back because he can't sign a contract anywhere else, and then maybe you can use that in terms of your ability to trade him. But this would make absolutely no sense for Philadelphia other than as a leverage tactic to force James Harden to show up. That's the only way that this is helpful for Philadelphia. And for Harden, of course, he's going to show up. He doesn't want to lose out on all this money. He opted into the contract because he wanted the money, because there wasn't a deal out there for him. And he's already lost a ton of money over the last couple of seasons with some bad contract decisions in Houston, Brooklyn, and now in Philadelphia as well, which makes it that much stranger that he decided to opt in with the Sixers in the first place. But I also wonder what this means for the future of the league, because this is a clause that not only is in the current CBA, the new one that was just signed, but it was in the old one as well. And the only reason that it didn't come into play with Ben Simmons or Kevin Durant or James Harden in the past, guys that have requested trades with years left on their contract, is because it specifically refers to players that are on expiring deals. But I wonder if the league might consider expanding this in the future, in the next CBA, or to amend this CBA to say that this now counts for any player, regardless of how many years are left on their contract and forcing them to show up, because it does provide an interesting bit of leverage. It's unlikely that the team would actually void the contract of the player and actually ban them from the league, but just the threat of it could make players actually show up for their teams even if they're not at full capacity, and limit their ability to maintain their leverage in terms of a trade request by just not showing up at all. And again, it would be extremely difficult to regulate what exactly it means for a player to show up and thus not be allowed to be banned from the league. But it's interesting that this is even a thing in the CBA in the first place, and has been for years. So at this point, do I anticipate James Harden's NBA career actually being over? No. But I do think that this is an interesting little bit of insight into what the future of the league could look like. Because everybody agrees that the league is going to look dramatically different in terms of player movement 10 years from now than it does right now. And maybe one of the ways that it'll look different, one of the ways that they can limit all these trade requests with players with multiple years left on their contracts, could be something similar to what we're seeing with James Harden here. But the problem with this for Philadelphia is, in terms of right now, not 10 years from now, this does not help them with their James Harden situation really at all. All it allows them to do is say, hey, you do have to show up to training camp and to practice and to play in the games. It doesn't say that he has to play well, and we know exactly what it looks like when James Harden shows up to somewhere that he doesn't want to be. And unless the Sixers literally want to ban James Harden from the NBA, they are still in a terrible position here. And by the way, think about if the Sixers actually went through with this. If they did actually ban James Harden, think about what that would mean for their reputation around the league. It might be necessary right now as a leverage point to try and salvage whatever this situation is becoming, so that Joel Embiid doesn't want to leave, so that the entire process era doesn't end overnight, because once again, the second star guy around Joel Embiid wants to leave, and then now all of a sudden he wants to leave. But imagine if they actually did this. There would never be another star player that would sign in Philadelphia that would request a trade to Philadelphia. It would be incredibly damaging, because they would have cost James Harden $35 million. They would have banned him from the league, prevented him from signing anywhere else, which means this is incredibly unlikely. There's almost no way that the Sixers would actually ban James Harden, that he's actually played his last game in the NBA. But the fact that this is even a clause in the CBA, for whatever reason, not just this current CBA, but the previous one as well, is really, really interesting to me. And so maybe, whether it's enacted or not, this is a bit of a turning point in this player movement era. All these players requesting trades despite being on long-term contracts, and just the threat of this being out there, and maybe even some teams or some players or some agents being made aware of the fact that this is even a thing and a possible solution in the future, could be a turning point, a pivot point that we look back on for years to come as a point in which things really changed dramatically. And I'm really curious to know in the comments if you guys think this should be a thing moving forward. Should they enact this clause and expand on it potentially in future CBAs to really try and limit some of the crazy player movement, some of the trade requests? What are your guys' ideas, beyond just banning a player in an expiring contract year, to try and fix what many see is a player movement and a trade request issue in the NBA right now?